All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a theory that is, frankly, going to totally change how you look at ancient texts. It suggests that some of the world's most ancient spiritual stories aren't actually historical accounts at all. Instead, they're a hidden literal roadmap for a really intense biological process that's happening inside your own body right now.
Think about that for a second. What if one of the most famous stories in human history, the epic tale from 2,000 years ago, isn't about the distant past, but is actually a monthly biological event, a cycle unfolding like clockwork within your very own nervous system? Crazy, right?
To understand this massive internal map, we are going to break it down into 5 key steps. 1. The ultimate biological secret. 2. Birth and the descent. 3. The trial of preservation. 4. The internal crucifixion. And finally, 5. Resurrection and enlightenment.
Starting off with Section 1, the ultimate biological secret, unlocking the inner map. So to really grasp the linguistic foundation of this whole theory, we have to start with the biblical crucifixion site, Golgotha. Now, if you translate that directly, it literally means the place of the skull. Proponents of this theory argue that this isn't some ancient geographic location on a map. No, it's a direct reference to human anatomy. Basically, your cranium is the actual physical stage for this entire drama.
And they point right to the scripture itself to back this up. They don't view these texts as metaphors, To them, this is a literal biological statement. The Christ, they argue, is actually a physical, life-giving substance that exists literally inside of you.
And this maps directly to key players in your brain. It's truly fascinating. The theory equates the feminine Mary energy to your pituitary gland, which produces this whitish fluid, kind of like milk. Then you've got the masculine Joseph energy tied to the pineal gland, which produces a golden fluid they refer to as honey. Put them together, and they literally create the biblical land of milk and honey right there inside your head.
Which brings us to Section 2, Birth and the Descent. The hero's journey begins.
So the journey kicks off in this little-known part of the brain called the claustrum. It's just a thin sheet of neurons, but the theory draws this wild, surprising parallel between the word claustrum and Santa Claus. The idea here is that this is the exact spot where a life-giving gift, what they call the sacred secretion, or the Christ oil, is created, right before it gets sent down the chimney of your spine.
Now, once this oil is born, it's got to travel, right? It moves down the spinal cord all the way to the solar plexus, which, in this anatomical map, is identified as the biblical Bethlehem. It becomes a seed there, and then continues downward until it finally rests in the sacrum. And if you look up the Latin root for sacrum, it literally translates to the sacred bone.
Let's move on to Section 3, the trial of preservation, guarding the sacred seed.
Here's where things get a bit tricky. According to the theory, your everyday lifestyle choices dictate whether this precious substance is wasted or saved. You know the infamous 7 deadly sins? Things like gluttony, lust, and chronic anger? Well, they aren't just viewed as moral failings here. They are considered actual physical actions that biologically drain the sacred secretion, totally stopping its return journey dead in its tracks.
All right, Section 4, the internal crucifixion, the ascent and refinement. If you actually manage to protect this oil, it begins its upward phase. And this entire climb revolves around one absolute master number that links biology to spirit, 33. Why 33? Well, it represents the exact number of vertebrae the oil must climb, like a ladder. But it also connects perfectly to the age of Christ at the crucifixion, and even the 33 degrees of Freemasonry. So, the preserved oil climbs up from the sacrum, past the heart, and arrives at the vagus nerve in the throat. Interestingly, in anatomy, the vagus nerve is often called the tree of life. And right here is where the whole concept of crucifixion gets totally redefined. It does not mean death. Instead, it represents this intense physiological amplification. It's a literal refinement of the oil into a much higher state.
And this refinement follows a very, very strict timeline. It takes exactly 2.5 days for this intense biological transformation to happen. If you know the story, that's a direct biological parallel to the exact time Jesus was said to have spent in the tomb. During this 2.5-day window, the theory states you literally have to resist all lower urges just to allow the process to perfectly complete itself.
And finally, Section 5, Resurrection and Enlightenment, the final activation.
So after those 2.5 days, the newly refined oil ascends and crosses a specific part of the brainstem called the pons. This name is absolutely perfect, because pons translates directly to bridge in Latin.
By crossing this bridge, the oil completely leaves the central nervous system and moves directly into the very center of the brain.
The final destination? The optic thalamus. The ancient Greeks allegedly referred to this specific area as the light of the world and the divine throne room. When that refined, amplified oil finally arrives here, it's said to switch on totally dormant brain cells, triggering a profound state of absolute enlightenment.
So what is the ultimate payoff for all of this? Well, preserving and elevating this sacred oil is described as a massive, almost superhuman personal upgrade. We're talking crystal clear vision and purpose, absolutely supercharged motivation and intuition, and just an overwhelming feeling of deep inner peace. It's essentially framed as the full, literal activation of your highest human potential.
You know, there's a passage from Romans that really captures the entire essence of this biological quest. The ultimate goal isn't just following some arbitrary moral rules for the sake of it. It's about actively resisting lower urges so you can allow for a literal, physiological renewing of your mind.
This whole theory weaves together anatomy, scripture, and mysticism into just an incredible map. It really makes you reconsider everything. What if the ancient mystics weren't pointing up at the heavens at all, but were actually pointing inwards? Could this internal biological journey be the real hidden path to our divine potential? It is a pretty profound perspective to chew on as you navigate your own internal world.